So, the final hack I have for you guys, which you may be asking yourself, okay, that's all great. That's a great idea, everything you've been saying. But they're telling me that I have to memorize this incredible unit circle, right? With all these values, square root of 3 over 2, and da-da-da-da. And I mean, millions of 0, 1s, 1s, zeros, and everything is all over the place. And they invent some crazy patterns to explain why this is negative or something, or they kind of halfway are talking about what I've mentioned in this video, but they don't really go there or something. It's all extremely confusing. And a lot of students end up memorizing, like, how many values is it? It's like 24 different values in the unit circle. So what I'm telling you is this is completely unnecessary. I've explained how this works in terms of understanding. So now you're going to be saying, well, what about all these special angles? How do I figure out all these special angles, because they're not going to let me use a calculator? Well, guess what? There is an incredibly simple solution. Okay. Which is, the hardest thing about this, okay, is simply to remember what the special angles are. The special angles are 0, 30, 45, 60, and 90. This is literally the only thing about this table that I'm going to show you that you have to memorize, which is why it's the greatest table ever made. Because you don't have to memorize anything. You don't have to memorize where you put what. So it doesn't matter if I put sine first or cosine. That doesn't change how this works, okay? That is really important. Okay, so the way this works is very simple, and this is going to allow you to simply apply, and I'll show you how, everything we just did to get all of these values without memorizing anything. So all we need to do is know these special angles and their cosines and sines. Now, some of you, many of you have memorized these 30, 60, 90 triangles and the 45, 45, 90 triangles, which is, you know, not a bad thing to do for geometry. It helps you solve geometry and stuff. But it is kind of like a little bit of a pain. Every time I think, what is cosine of 60? Then I have to like think, okay, this is what this triangle looks like. Now I got to twist it around in my head so I'm sure I'm doing cosine and stuff. It's a lot of sort of work. I mean, people memorize and get used to it, but honestly, this table just takes care of all of this, okay? So the only thing you need to understand about this table, first of all, you got to remember what the special angles are. Great. Then the other thing you got to do is simply understand how to remember what cosine of 0 or sine of 0 or one of these 4 major values here is. And again, I really suggest you don't memorize this stuff, but you just think about it the way I just explained it. And you think, whoops, that's not it. And you think, what is the cosine of 0, for instance? Okay, and the cosine of 0, this is the x length. When this angle becomes flat, the cosine is 1. Okay, so cosine of 0 is 1. I don't memorize this. Every time I do this, I think about it just to make sure I'm doing it right. So if cosine is 1, here's one little thing that you probably have noticed that you can just remember, I guess you could call it memorize, is that things are always opposite. So when cosine is 1, then sine is 0, and then it flips around at 90. So then here it would be 1, 0. So you just need one of these 4 values that you figure out by understanding what I explained before, not by memorizing. And then you have these 4 things already in your table. Now here comes the amazing hack. You just put divided by 2 in every remaining box. And now you pick anywhere you want and you start with 0. Okay, that's the only thing you gotta remember is to count up. And you go square root of 1, square root of 2, square root of 3, and you do the same thing in the other line. Again, it just matters that you go from 0 to 1, so square root of 1, square root of 2, and square root of 3. And you now have all the values that you need for the unit circle. These are all your special triangles. This takes like 10 seconds to write down at the beginning of an exam. And then you don't have to constantly refer back to these triangles or memorize the unit circle, which is even worse, or some combination of those two things. Now, if I say to you, what is, I don't know, well, obviously if I say to you, what is cosine of 30, okay, that's just, that's just in the first quadrant, cosine of 30. Well, I just look at my table, boom, cosine of 30 is square root of 3 over 2. Great, I'm done, okay? So cosine of 135 is in the second quadrant because it's before 180. What angle are we actually talking about? Well, if this is 135, we subtract that from 180 and we get 45. Okay, so now we want to know the cosine of 135. Well, what do? We say, okay, we know that's numerically equivalent to cosine of 45 because of what I explained before. It's the reference angle that counts. Then we just have to decide, is it positive or negative? Well, cosine is the x-axis, so in this case, it's going to be negative, right? And then, we don't memorize the unit circle. We don't memorize 10 or 24 different values on this thing. We just look in our table. What is cosine of 45? Well, it's square root of 2 over 2. So it's negative square root of 2 over 2. Bam. What is sine of 135? Well, it's simply sine of 45. We know that is true because that is the reference angle we're talking about. Is sine going to be negative or positive here? Well, it's the second quadrant. It looks like it's going to be positive, and so then we look in the table and we go, oh, sine of 45 is also square root of 2 over 2. We are done. Okay, let's do one more. So let's say we do, let's do 330. Okay, so now we have an angle here, 330 degrees all the way around. Once again, we just look at the x-axis. What's left is the triangle with a reference angle of 30, because 30 plus 330 is 360. So let's say we're worried about the cosine of 330. Well, once again, we know it's going to be numerically equivalent to the cosine of 30, because that's the triangle we're talking about. And then you think cosine is x. Okay, that's going to be positive. And then you look in the table, which took you 2 seconds to make, and you say cosine of 30 is square root of 3 over 2. Done. Okay? What about sine of 330? Well, that's going to be equivalent to sine of 30. And then we think about the negative sign. Sine is y. It's going to be negative. Then you say, okay, now I need to figure out what this is. And you just look at your table that you made at the beginning because it's so easy. And you get square root of 1 over 2, which is just 1 over 2, right? Square root of 1 is just 1. That's it. Now you can get every single cosine and sine, sorry about that, in the whole unit circle without memorizing anything. Even the special angles you don't need to memorize. All you need to understand is how the angles work, where things are positive and negative, because cosine is x, sine is y. And then with this table, you're invincible. You have the whole unit circle without memorizing a single thing, okay? So let me just point out 1 or 2 little things about this table to make your life easier so you don't have to figure it out yourself. This can be rewritten as 1 over the square root of 2, right? Because little just radical stuff, it really isn't that hard. Square root of 2 over 2 is equal to square root of 2 over square root of 2 times square root of 2, because that gives you 2, and so you cancel and you get 1 over square root of 2. Okay, so that's just, sometimes you'll see this written as 1 over square root of 2. The other thing is tan. Well, tan, remember, is sine over cosine. So this is also really easy, okay? Sine is 0, cosine is 1 at 0, so we get 0 over 1, which is 0, okay? Now here, tan is a weird function, very different than the other ones, which is something that We'll have to talk about another point, but here it gives you 1 over 0, because sine is 1, and cosine is 1, which is infinity, right? It's not defined. So here we have tan is undefined, okay? And that again is, you just do it from the table. You don't need to memorize it. And now here's another little trick to make this easier. So if I'm saying I want to divide sine by cosine for 30 degrees, it looks really scary. Well, guess what? Two fractions that have the same thing on the bottom, when you're dividing, you just ignore the bottom, right? So this is simply square root of 1 over square root of 3, or 1 over square root of 3, okay? Same thing happens at 60. It's just square root of 3 over 1, or just square root of 3. And really kind of one of the few things I recommend memorizing is 45. At 45, sine and cosine are the same, and so tan is 1, okay? That's actually sort of worth remembering, but it's also clear from the table, those two values are the same. There you go. Now you have everything you need, and you don't have to memorize a thing. This table, just make sure you do it right. That's all I can say. You know, just check it over a couple times if you want. You know, at the beginning of the test or whatever, just check it with your triangles if that makes you feel better. Or just make sure you got the values right. Just take a second to double check, because if you're using the table for the whole test, you don't want to have that messed up. But this table, plus understanding what's going on, makes this whole topic relatively simple. As long as you don't, you know, the major things I warn against are always stay with the x-axis, all right? And and the positive negative, you just have to think that cosine is the x and sine is the y. And that helps you think about plus and minus, and also helps you think about the special cases. 0, 90, 180, 270, etc. 360, right? Same thing as 0. Stay to the x-axis when you make the triangles to make their reference angle, and then use the plus and minus. Get the plus and minus thinking about the sides of the triangle and where they are. Don't memorize. That'll help you also get these angles and their cosines. You just think about what happens to x and y. And then lastly, you just use the table, and you don't have to memorize anything. Hope that helps. Thank you.